Good morning, Gulf to Lake Church, or it may be again afternoon or evening when you tune into this, but we're glad you're with us today. This is the 25th of May, and before I jump in and continue our Bible study on the book of James, I know a lot of you, like me, you just wonder what in the world is happening in this country. You know, the killing of all those kids, elementary kids in Texas, it's just kind of had me a little bit upset today. Just this was such an out of the way place, and now of course all the political garbage will start of getting rid of guns, like the guns did all this, when it's really the fact that they, as it says in Ecclesiastes, because crime is not treated quickly and swiftly is the reason that people do all these things. We have allowed a culture to exist that promotes all of this. So, you know, I'm sorry if you don't agree with me on this. You have the right to be wrong. It's not about the guns. It's about the people with them, and taking it away from honest people is not going to stop one bit a criminal from doing whatever they've got to do to get it. But again, it's just the whole idea and attitude of what's going on in this country today. Like every day we're bombarded by them turning upside down the values that we all had, that we grew up with. And it's sad. I mean, and it is serious. So having said that, and then plus, you know, all that's going on politically and morality is just, sometimes it's just a little bit almost too much. But then I come back to reality that God is still God, and that He still left us here for a reason. And things were bad in the days of the apostles. And right after Jesus left this earth, things were bad, and we need to be able to find that encouragement and that challenge. And I'm just going to say to you that we need more pastors, myself included, who become more and more convinced that we need to be telling people the truth in love, but the truth, and that truth may offend them, that truth may turn them away, that truth may turn them somewhere else. They may leave a church because they don't want to hear it. And by the way, we've had, goodness gracious, I last thought of at least 7 or 8 families that during this pandemic thing, and mainly after I preached a sermon, Will the Real America Please Stand Up? And I named names in that sermon. You know, people just, they left. You know, well, politics and religion, they said, don't mix. Well, yeah, they do. They mix all the time. And when politics is immorality and is promoting immorals and antichrist sentiment, then we need to be doing something. All right, there's my rant for today. I could say a lot more. I could spend the whole time telling you of the things that we need to be able to speak out against and correct. But what I want to do is say, you know, God is still calling us to living for Him, regardless of what's going to happen in the future, tomorrow, next year. We're still called to obey Him and to represent Him correctly, and to bring encouragement, as James was doing, to the people of his day, the Christians of his day, who were being persecuted, who were being actually not only ostracized, but thrown into jail, many times killed for no other reason that they were a follower of Christ. So last week I left with us reading a Psalm 15 that David gave, and I want to do it very quickly again, and then as I told you, break down some of the things that he says there, remembering this, that the main gist of last week was that there is this difference between our eternal inheritance, being born again, being forgiven, being secure in the Lord Jesus, knowing that we're going to heaven when we die, that it's not about how good we've lived, but it's about how good God is. And also we called it our temporal experience or our daily living. And that is what James mainly is talking about, is our daily living. And David did also. So let me pick up with verse 2 in Psalm 15 and quickly read this, and then let's comment. He who walks with integrity and works righteousness and speaks the truth in his heart. He does not slander with his tongue, nor does evil to his neighbor, nor takes up a reproach against his friend, in whose eyes a reprobate is despised, but who honors those who fear the Lord. He swears to his own hurt and does not change. He does not put out his money at interest, nor does he take a bribe against the innocent. He who does these things will never be shaken. He begins in verse 1 saying, who can live with the Lord? Who can dwell in his tabernacle or on his holy hill? And this is what he's saying right there. Now, first of all, verse 2, they walk with integrity. Folks, those who enjoy an intimate fellowship with the Lord do not have hidden areas of shame in their lives. Their walk or their way of life is in harmony with God's standards. As it says in Proverbs 27, a righteous man who walks in his integrity, how blessed are his sons after him. You see, folks, one of the byproducts of a life of integrity is having a happy family life. But if you're a man or a woman, a husband or a wife, a mom or a dad, and you're guilty of living against the Lord, and you're involved in something, maybe it's morals, immorality, or something like that, you live under the constant fear of being found out. And I just want to be able to say to you today, as I want to become bolder, kinder but bolder in what I'm saying, I'm tired of people believing today that they can live any way they want to live. They can disobey God. They can say that they don't want to get involved in the culture of the day. They can live immorally. They can be having affairs. They can be, involved in homosexuality. Even today, the transgender thing, whatever it may be. To believe that we can live that kind of a life and still say that we are a follower and a believer of Jesus Christ. You see, I'm believing. Now, listen, we all have areas of hypocrisy. I do, and I know it. There's times where I have a bit of a Pharisee in me, just like those of Jesus's day. But folks, the bottom line is this. If you are a follower of Jesus Christ, your daily life that James is talking about, your practice of Christianity, you're not going to be involved in that. You're not going to make a habit out of that. You may have seen the video that Steve and I were just talking about an hour or so ago of this pastor in Indiana that came out and they videoed the whole thing where he admitted to being involved in this affair with a girl, a woman, but since she was 16. And he was a youth pastor, and he admitted it to the church. And if you get a chance, look at that, because it's very telling. Folks, I'm not God. There's no way that I can know everything in a person's heart. I don't even know in my own a lot of times. But I do know enough about the scripture that you can't make a habit, a lifestyle out of that and still believe that you're a child of God. We need to live like it. And so many times we're afraid to tell people today. They're sitting in our congregations every Sunday and they're involved in immorality. They're living together. And in front of their kids, they're doing that. And they're maybe promoting homosexuality or lesbianism, and their kids see that and know that they approve of that. Or listen, we are dealing with things today that 40 years ago I would have never dreamed that I would be having to say anything about it from a pulpit. People today that are mixed up in all this immorality. I'm not going to go any further. I'll get too personal. But you live a life of integrity, is what David is saying. And also in verse 2, he said they will work righteousness. In other words, again, like I'm just talking about, they will have a right behavior before the Lord. People who dwell in the Lord's presence, folks, they've made a habit out of being ethical, being honest and straightforward in their daily life. Not that they're not going to slip up. I slip up all the time, but I hope I'm not making a habit out of sins in my life that are displeasing to God. He goes on to say in verse 2 that they speak truth in their hearts. Now, it's interesting to me when I read certain phrases in the Bible, because we don't say things like that today. So nowhere else in Scripture do we find that particular phrase, speaks the truth in his heart. See, normally we think of speaking as something that's done with our mouth, not our hearts. But in reality, Jesus really gets to the bottom of this, and the Bible gets to the root of this when he says, in reality, it is the heart and not the mouth that dictates what we say. Proverbs 23:7, for as a man thinks within himself, so he is. Jesus also commented on this distinction as well. He says in Mark 7, verse 21 through 23, listen to this. For from within, out of the heart of men, proceed evil thoughts, fornications, thefts, murders, adulteries, deeds of coveting and wickedness, as well as deceit, sensuality, envy, slander, pride, and foolishness. This is what Jesus said. All these evil things proceed from within and defile the man. If we want to dwell in the presence of God, folks, we need to really make that credibility gap between our heart and our tongue and our living as small as we can. We need to speak the truth in our hearts. Here's another one in verse 3. They do not slander. They do not slander. That's interesting there. I told you there's some interesting words today. That term in the Hebrew, slander, means this: the foot or hoof of a horse. What has that got to do with anything? The foot or hoof of a horse. Well, here's the Hebrew idea. Walking into a situation, looking it over, backing out carefully, and then hoofing it from place to place to spread our gossip or our slander. Things that are really nobody else's business that we need not to be saying. Webster defines slander as the utterance of false charges or misrepresentations which defame and damage another's reputation. So, you know what that tells me? That slander is not just simply me telling a lie about someone. It's distorting the truth about that person rather than just sticking to the facts. All right, also in verse 3, they do no evil to their neighbors. The Living Bible, I think, captures this thought very well, because here's what it says. They do not listen to gossip. You see, believers not only avoid speaking slander, but we don't listen to it about other people. And there's been a few times, I'm sorry to say, like most of you, I've not been brave enough. I've not been spiritual enough. I've not been convicted enough many times in my life to not listen to something that I kind of knew was slander. And the few times that I've said, I probably don't need to hear that. I don't know, and I don't know that you know that that's absolutely true. So I probably don't need to hear that. Now, I've done that a few times, and I felt really better about myself. I've lost some people over that. But that's what he's talking about here. Also in verse 3, they do not take up a reproach against their friends. And here, David is using a word reproach that means cutting or sharp, something cutting or sharp. And what does he do? He changes the focus from neighbor to friend. So kind of drawing this application down to our closest relationships. After all, I think you would all agree with me that the cuts of friends go a lot deeper than just surface relationships. Why? Because we've made ourselves vulnerable to certain people, and we've exposed our weaknesses and our frailties, and sometimes they use that against us. Verse 4, he says, they despise a reprobate. A reprobate here is literally a worthless person. And listen, we need to be despising a lot of the things that we see going on in this country right now. We do need to despise it. We need to hate it. And we need to be wanting to do everything that we can to change it. And I don't want to dwell on this too much or harp on this too much, but it just really is getting to me when I've had people say to me, and I hear people on the news, and I hear people who think that they're putting down Christianity by saying, well, politics and religion don't mix. And I want to say it again. Yes, they do mix. What you're saying is, I don't want you talking about those things because I politically don't believe those things or agree with you. So, but we need to look at what's going on in this world today and say, yes, I hate that. I despise that's happening in our country. Verse 4 says, those that honor and fear the Lord, the Bible says, render to all what is due to them. And that's what that verse basically means. Verse 4 is one that I've always loved, and I've preached about it before. People who will swear to their own hurt and do not change. Simply put, practicing Christians keep their promises. Let me say that again. Practicing Christians keep their promises. When they give their word to do something, they do it, no matter how difficult it may be. And we see people today all the time changing. We see people today that they go to a church, they're there for a little while, they're gone. You remember the sermon a while back? I said, you know what it's like today? It's like, hello, good to see you, goodbye. Hello, good to see you, goodbye. Now, here at Gulf to Lake, and I notice this, I notice trends a lot. We have been so blessed. We have so many, more than I would have ever dreamed, people who have stayed faithful, stayed with it, stayed with us. Now, I'm not saying that there's never a reason why somebody should not leave. I believe there are reasons why people should leave. But I'm just saying that for the most part, when people don't like what they hear, especially when it comes to practicing the Christian life that James is talking about and David is talking about, then the credibility actually of our Christianity is going to always depend upon your personal reliability. And I want to see more in Christianity today of us pastors standing up and saying, folks, if you're gonna swear to your own hurt and don't change. Don't get offended because the pastor says something that you don't like, or someone maybe didn't speak to you, or they sat in your seat, or whatever it may be. There's so much of that today. And I want us to be a group of people that are willing to say, you know what, I said I was going to do that. It is inconvenient for me to follow through, but I'm going to follow through. All right, here's another one. Verse 5, they do not loan money at interest to a brother or a close friend. Now, one paraphrase says, I think more colorfully, they don't put the bite on people. And you know, according to Jewish law, and I will give you some references if you want them, Leviticus 25, Deuteronomy 23, according to Jewish law, a Jew was not to charge interest on a loan to another Jew. And why? Because they thought that love should prompt one person to assist somebody, help them, not try to make a profit off of someone in need. Doesn't happen much today, does it? All right, another part of verse 5, they do not take a bribe against an innocent person. You know what that means? They can't be bought. How many people are there like that today? I mean, I don't care if it's in a business transaction. I don't care if you're on a jury or in a matter of trust in a relationship. That person can't be bought. And we don't see that today. In our court system, that's about all we do see. They've been bought off. We see that in politics with the lobbying and everything else. I mean, it doesn't matter if it's talking about killing babies in the womb. They can be bought off by lobbyists and politicians or somebody, you know, like all these, the Clintons and the Pelosi's and the Bidens and people like that they know they've broken the law and they know that they've cheated. Doesn't matter. You know, that's what we need to not be those kind of people, that we cannot be bought. And then you have David's promise. David says in verse 5, if you will practice these traits, then you will never be shaken. You know, I like the illustration here, the life of a believer, like the one that we just talked about here in Psalm 15. It can kind of be compared to a tree. The visible part of our lives, you know, our outward walk that we're talking about in James, that's kind of like the trunk and the branches of the tree. You can see them, but it's the thing that's underneath the surface, below in the soil. Those are the qualities that provide the roots and the stability for us to make that life that we have up here in our daily living. That solid foundation is so important, folks, in today's society where morals are just wavering and people are actually looking for us to fail as believers, and they're looking for us to be hypocritical so that they can point and say, well, see, there's nothing to that. Now, you know, this didn't just start in the last few years. This kind of scrutinizing, you know, is nothing new. It was practiced way back in Daniel's day, you know, way back in the 500s before Christ. In Daniel chapter 6, there was a man named Darius, the king of Media Persia, and he had I told you in a sermon, he had divided the world into 120 different sections, and he put they called them satraps or governors over every one of those. But he had 3 commissioners over all of those 120 governors. Daniel was one of those. And Daniel was about to be promoted to be the number 1 commissioner over those other 3. And so what happened? He began to outshine the other guys. Jealousy stepped in. So we read in Daniel 6 in verse 3, then this Daniel began distinguishing himself among the commissioners and satraps because he possessed an extraordinary spirit, and the king planned to appoint him over the entire kingdom. Then the commissioners and satraps began trying to find a ground of accusation against Daniel in regard to government affairs. Sound familiar, doesn't it? And how people today are trying to scrutinize us in the church, especially those of us that are public in our preaching and our teaching and so forth. And unfortunately, as Pastor Steve and I were talking about earlier, more and more and more, there's men and women who can't bear up under this close scrutinizing of their life. I mean, I'm not going to go into what we were talking about because it's not fun and it's not something that I want to share right now. But nevertheless, we go on to verse 4 about Daniel, and it says this, and this is what I hope for us. I hope for me, for Steve, for Pastor John, for Chris, for Nancy, for everybody that's in ministry, and it would be this: but they could find no ground of accusation or evidence of corruption, inasmuch as they were faithful. He, talking about Daniel, and no negligence or corruption was to be found in him. What kind of people can have their lives pinched and poked and prodded like Daniel's was and still be found blameless? Only those, as we go back to the beginning, who live in the tabernacle of God and who worship that kind of a God and live with him on his holy mountain, as it talks about in Psalm 15. Well, I'm now going to go to the book of James, but I'm going to stop. That is a great place, worked out great, about 25 minutes, I think, Steve. So we're going to end with that today, and next week we're going to jump right into James 1 and about when James talks about when your troubles won't go away. What do you do? So, folks, I hope that today was a blessing and that you heard and you understood a lot of what my heart is, and that is that, you know what? It doesn't matter what they say. It doesn't matter if they want to criticize us. As I said, there's times I'm a hypocrite. There's times I got a Pharisee in me. But we shouldn't be practicing a habit, a lifestyle of living a sinful life. Again, I would just say that if you've been involved in that kind of a life, immorality in particular, because that is the sin that so easily besets us today, and you're able to do that continually and come to church and say you're worshiping God, and you have no conviction that you better get this thing right, then I would start looking at my life and say, I wonder if I'm really a believer. I wonder if I really am saved. All right. God bless you. Have a great day, and we'll look forward to seeing you Sunday.